phase of moon.
Welcome to Third Phase of Moon. My name's Blake Cousins. Now get ready for the start of an amazing journey. The largest YouTube channel is now on the largest civilian-run radio station, Third Phase of Moon Radio with researchers on a mission. Host Dr. J. Andy Elias and best-selling author, MUFON investigator Preston Dennett are about to take you on all the rides of our lives. We'll be taking UFO news, interviewing top researchers. The journey begins now. Third Phase of Moon Radio is officially on air. Without further ado, here comes Third Phase of Moon, researchers on a mission.
We welcome you back to another episode of Third Phase of Moon Radio. I'm your host, Dr. J, and today we have an amazing show for you today. We bring back the godfather of ufology, Stanton Friedman. Welcome to the show. How are you this evening?
Well, I'm delighted to be here in beautiful Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, where it's freezing cold.
We're actually the opposite side here in Los Angeles. It's actually on the warm side. Every time it would dip below, it'd be warm. Cold. What you consider would be warm would probably be cold here. But nonetheless, I wanted to say 2013 is over, 2014, new year. More people believe in UFOs. What do you expect this year to happen for ufology?
What do I expect is going to happen this year coming up or the past year?
This year coming up as we put a close to last year.
I think that we're moving in the right direction. I just found out, for example, that work is well underway in a movie about the Flatwoods Monster case in West Virginia, which is one a lot of people haven't heard of, but an exciting case. And Frank Ficino, the guy who's been investigating for more than 20 years, I just talked to him tonight, and they're working on the movie, and it's a very good case from 1952, and we just found a new witness today, would you believe? And so,
60 years later, you found a new witness.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's that's exciting because you don't often find, and this happened in 52, where Roswell was 47, so my old line is that we're racing the Undertaker and losing when it comes to all the old cases because people are dying. So the younger cases, the newer ones, are a little easier to deal with in terms of people still alive. So I expect this year is going to be, I'm excited by a couple of different things. One is we've got a big MUFON conference coming up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, just outside Philadelphia in July. And Roswell has got a big event coming up, 3 days for the annual festival in early July in Roswell, New Mexico, of course. And I'm doing something I've done a couple times before, but it's a little different. I'm going to be sort of leading a tour on a bus of 3 places in New Mexico, Los Alamos, Roswell, and Trinity Site, which is where the first atom bomb was tested. And that site's only open 2 days a year, and I'll be there for both of them in October and in April. These are all listed on my website, www.stantonfriedman.com, but we'll be looking at these places. People have a chance, if they've never been to Trinity, like I say, it's only open 2 days a year, where the first atom bomb was tested. History was certainly made there, and we'll be at Roswell, and history was made there, and we'll be checking out Los Alamos, which is where the atom bomb was designed, and, a very important national laboratory. It's kind of funny. During the war, there were Nobel Prize winners there, picking up their mail at a post office box in Santa Fe. Nobody knew who they were. Secret activities. New Mexico's the place. So it's kind of exciting. And one thing about New Mexico, you don't normally have to worry much about the traffic on the roads. There aren't so many people there. Unlike California, I might add.
Empty. You know, real quick, I wanted to, what you just said about the Flatwoods Monster, that mainstream media is making a movie. A lot of people don't know much about it. You mind giving a brief description of what you know about the case?
Well, in 1952, which was the biggest year for Project Blue Book in terms of the number of sightings, this was in September 12th, I guess it was, and a whole bunch of sightings over Washington, D.C. in July and later on. And then there was a whole burst of sightings in early September. And Frank Fascino, who's been following this case for more than 20 years, he's got relatives in West Virginia, and he's dug out witnesses. And it turns out there was a family, well, there were a bunch of people. Kids were playing ball over at the schoolyard over there, and they saw something over the nearby mountain, big hill, dashed over to see where it came down, and they picked up one of the kids' mothers and a cousin, and they started up the hill, and then I'll call it a monster because that's just what everybody called it. Something came out from behind a bunch of trees and went under the branch, which gave them a measure of its height, sort of floated along, scared the bejeebers out of them, and there were dogs that went up and they turned tail and ran. Some of the kids got sick. There was some kind of vapor coming from this thing. And the National Guard got involved in this, and the story was big time. And Frank put out a book about it, actually 3 of them, one after the other, variations, the Flatwoods Monster case. And people called it a creature, but it wasn't. It was a device, if you will. Maybe it was a hazmat suit or something like that, but it was big, and it moved strangely and scared the heck out of people, and got a lot of publicity back then. But until Frank came along, nobody's really done a systematic investigation. He's found loads of new witnesses, and I've been up there, and I don't know what was attracting them, but it turns out that night there were sightings all over the place, and he has documented what seemed to be a number of, well, temporary touchdowns, I'll put it that way. And people, the government tried to pass it off, oh, it's just a bunch of meteors. Meteors move rapidly. They don't stay in one place very long, to say the least. And they don't land and walk around or move around. And it was perfectly clear when I was at the site that ask any pilot, if you're having difficulties, you look for an area that doesn't have trees on it. You find the clearing because you don't want to run into those trees. And that was what struck me when I was there. Oh, I see why they ran it here, because there's nothing in the way. You look all around you, there are lots of woods in West Virginia. So it's a very good case. It got a certain amount of publicity, but Frank's books have really done the trick. Frank Fascino, F-E-S-C-H-I-N-O. And look for the movie. I don't know what the title will be, or I tell you.
Well, speaking of movies, wasn't there one being made about your book, Top Secret Magic?
Well, supposedly it is going to be made. They've optioned the rights to my book, Top Secret Magic, M-A-J-I-C, and to the book by Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, Witness to Roswell. And it would be sort of like All the President's Men, an expose, conflict, there are different views about Roswell and especially about MJ-12. And I'm still battling the nasty, noisy negativists about MJ-12. That's what I do. I'm the guy defending it. Nobody else is making much in the way of noise pro MJ-12. But anybody who reads the book, I think, Top Secret Magic, will find ample basis for saying that there are these 3 documents that were top secret, eyes only, that are probably the most important documents ever leaked to the public, because they say President Truman established a group called Majestic 12 to deal with what happened at Roswell. This was in September 47. Roswell was July. And so I've done a heck of a lot of research on the book, on the documents, because, you know, we want to be very careful not to go public and then have somebody say, gotcha, we made it up, here's the proof. So I did an awful lot of research, and I'm anxious for the movie to come out. I mean, I'm getting old. I want it to come out while I'm still alive. So, I should add, there's a second book that movie rights have been optioned, captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. Now, most of the work was done by Kathleen Marden, who's Betty's niece, and she's a real expert on, certified hypnotist for that matter, on abduction cases. And she's written a book. This is listed on her website too. And so, this could be the year of the UFO, he says, hopefully, optimistically. You never know.
The mainstream media taking an interest, obviously could be a great thing. I mean, it's almost as if they could acclimate people to these UFOs for them actually coming. And just as we were saying off air, there was 100 sightings in California. Another host from the station witnessed something Christmas Day, Christmas night in Connecticut. This person from Idaho was called. Third Day of the Moon, like I said earlier, is being inundated with footage from around the world. It seems that the sightings are on the increase. Do you think they're making these movies to correlate, maybe because things are starting to collapse for them? The secret?
Well, I don't know. It's interesting to speculate because I find that people's attitudes, there's been a shift because of the Kepler satellite. It's very hard for anybody to say, oh, surely we're the only ones, or there can't be anybody else out there, and all that sort of thing. We're now talking, look at the jump in numbers here. Frank Drake of the SETI movement, Silly Effort to Investigate, SETI, said a few years ago there might be as many as 8,000 places in the galaxy that could send radio signals. With Kepler, we're saying that probably every star in the galaxy, someplace between 100 and 200 billion, has at least one planet. Some have 5, some have none, but on the average one. So rather than 8,000, a much better number might be 8 billion. So suddenly, the notion that, we're it, begins to shrink in significance. How many people believe that? If it could happen here, surely it could happen someplace else, and the planet is 4+ billion years old. Plenty of time for someone to be a little bit ahead of us, maybe only a million years, And so times have changed, in terms of overall attitudes about man's place in the universe and all that sort of thing. Our love of ourselves, our sense of uniqueness is kind of going down the tubes because it's pretty hard to imagine that we're the only ones. I mean, if you're going to talk about God, this is the best he could do? There's got to be other places. And then the evidence backs that up. There's so much evidence, and what enrages me sometimes is how especially the astronomers and the city cultists, as I call them, how they act toward this whole question. They don't want to look at the evidence. And I'm just having a little battle with Dr. Tyson, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's the head astronomer at the planetarium, Hayden Planetarium in New York. He's going to be redoing the Cosmos series. Remember the television series based on Carl Sagan's book?
Yes.
And Carl and I were classmates for 3 years at Chicago. And I did protest loudly to the station about some of the inaccuracies, like in the Betty and Barney Hill case. I mean, can you imagine? They got the windshield wipers going for that case. It was a beautiful, clear night. They saw the UFO go across the moon. They saw it next to a geological formation, 1.5 times the size, which would make it about 70 feet. And in the show, they've got it raining. So how could any of that have been seen? There are other things wrong, but I mean that. So I'm hoping my last 2 articles, I do a monthly column for the MUFON Journal, Mutual UFO Network Journal, And both have dealt with Dr. Tyson because some of the strange things he said. I mean, it's my feeling as a nuclear physicist that if a scientist is going to open up his mouth about something controversial, that he has a responsibility to have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear. And that's not always honored, that notion. Dr. Tyson, for example, in one of the classic remarks of the debunkers, the proof that the U.S. government can't keep secrets is how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. Now, that's one of those very funny remarks that has nothing to do with the question at hand. He also said, and this bothers me more because of my professional background, that our fastest craft would take 70,000 years to get to the next nearest star, so, obviously interstellar travel is out of the question. It's absurd. It doesn't have a propulsion system on it. It's like saying...
You've worked on craft, right? Faster than that.
What?
You've worked on craft faster than that.
Oh, yeah, and we've worked on ideas that would go very much faster than that. I mean, look, when the technological community wants a lot of energy, they go nuclear. And people are still astonished. I'm sure I've said it before to you. We have aircraft carriers that can go 18 years without refueling. That's an enormous accomplishment. That's with nuclear fission. With nuclear fusion, that's my baby. That's what makes the sun work. And every other star throughout the universe, not just a few, not just 10% of them, all of them work by nuclear fusion. That's what goes on in H-bombs. So we're not strangers to the fusion world. Admittedly, as you'd expect from Earthlings, we use it primarily for military purposes, but enormous amount of energy locked up. And yet the astronomers who know that the stars work by fusion never considered that, gee, maybe you could build a propulsion system around it. But it's not their business to build propulsion systems. I don't know why they think it's their business to debunk when they don't know what they're talking about. That's a Friedman rant, you'll understand, but what the heck. And I've challenged Dr. Tyson to a debate in my last two articles. He says he doesn't do debates. And I can understand why. If he's going to get involved in a subject about which he knows nothing, he's got better sense than that. But, and he ought to retract some of the stupid things he's been saying. So I have debated with Seth Shostak of the SETI Institute, and won. Debated with Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society, and won. Because these guys don't know anything. And I just wish there were more people on our side of the fence who would stand up and be counted instead of cowering off on the side. Don't want to stick my neck out. Somebody might think I'm a believer in flying saucers. Wow. How ridiculous. The truth is what matters.
You're absolutely right there, and I think it's the fear of them that scares them. But I think there has to be a point, at some point, where the belief of ufologists is going to have to match, or should I say, the belief of the astronomers, noisy negativists, is going to finally have to catch up where science is moving forward, and they're going to have to eat their own words. What event do you think is going to be required for that to happen?
Well, there's several different directions I look when I think about that. One would be to have some news media group have the equivalent of Woodward and Bernstein and blow the lid off the cosmic Watergate. There's enough classified documents on which you can read one sentence per page about UFOs from the NSA. Now everybody's heard of the NSA. When I used to mention the NSA, no such agency never says anything. Now, thanks to Mr. Snowden, everybody knows that they're the big Snoopy agency out there. They released 156 top secret Umbra UFO documents on which you can read one sentence per page. But there's no cover-up, Stan. And people tell me, I say, well, can you read what's under, in their case, the whiteout? Well, no. Then there is a cover-up. I got CIA top secret Umbra documents on which you can read 8 words on a page. Everything else is blacked out. And there's no cover-up. come on, guys. So one thing would be a serious, cosmic Watergate investigation, like the political Watergate. The second thing could be that some other governments decide to go public. The Russians, for example, have been releasing some stuff lately. The Soviet Navy, apparently, some of their files are being made available. I was down in Brazil a little over a month ago, and there were military people there working with the Brazilian ufologists to get the data out. And I'm sure that would have disturbed some people in the States, but hey, that's the way the cookie crumbles. I was in Finland. People say, why are there only sightings in the United States? Well, they're not. I helped celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Finnish UFO Society. We met at a planetarium, very respectable institution, you'll understand. And I went from Brazil, where it was 85 degrees, to Finland, where it was 20.
60 difference.
But what I'm saying is I'm encouraged by these things. So one thing would be for other governments. A third thing would be for insiders here in North America to decide that, hey, maybe they're on their deathbeds, maybe it's time to speak out because other people have. For people who may have held back a report or a document or something, to step up and be counted. Of course, it just might be that some television network would decide it's time to break it all open. And maybe we can start a rumor that Network A is doing it, and that'll get Network B, and then Network C will join in, so you can get there firstest with the mostest, So I don't know what all is going to happen, but also, one of the things I keep looking for, I'm sure that some of the old-timers who were gathering up pieces of a saucer out near Roswell, somebody might have put a piece in his boot, or in his pocket when nobody was watching or whatever. And maybe these turn up, and there has been some work lately on some pieces found in New Mexico, where the analysis is beginning to sound as if this stuff is of extraterrestrial origin. The isotope ratios, which are a key factor. So it may be any one of these directions, maybe all of them. And then I always think back to a German physicist, Max Planck, who said, new ideas come to be accepted, not because their opponents come to believe in them, but because their opponents die and a new generation grows up that's accustomed to them. And I think today's generations, the last couple anyway, are much more accustomed to the notion of spacefaring peoples and rockets and all this kind of stuff than anybody before. So I'm still an optimist.
China, right now, they landed successfully on the moon. Foolishly enough, we stopped NASA sending up people. We have to require the Russians to get our astronauts up there. Do you think if they were to find something that they would disclose, I mean, I know this is only speculation again, but do you think that may be a route?
Well, that would really do it, wouldn't it, if the Chinese sent back information? I have to say this. The transition between a world in which nationalism is king, which is where we live now, it's the only game in town, nationalism, to a world in which we start thinking of ourselves as earthlings, Terrans, or planetarians, or whatever you want to call it. That would be a very large step. And so rather than leading to further competition, maybe we all decide that, we're wasting an awful lot of money on this planet, killing people. I just heard the other day, 100 and some thousand people had been killed in Syria by its own government over the last few years.
Yes.
That doesn't say much for us. So it may well be, China, India, etc., turn the tide. I mean, look, if as Americans we constantly push for one vote, one person, we can't do that in a world government, can we? Because the Chinese got more than 4 times as many people as we do.
Right, almost a full billion, right? But
well, they've got 1.3 billion, and India has 1 billion. We got 300 million, 10 million. So we'd be outnumbered on any vote if we did it that way. And the big challenge is, how do you make that transition? How do you get rid of all this military spending? How do you start taking care of the people on the planet instead of killing them? That's a major challenge. And I'm hoping, I understand that I just heard today, just before I came in here, that the Pope had more people come up for masses this year, and twice as many as last year. So maybe that a new generation, new thinking. The Vatican is not avoiding the question of there being life out there. They've said there is. So, you know.
And anyway, that brings us to our first break. We'll pick that right back up because I have something important about China to ask you. Everybody stay tuned. Third Phase of the Moon Radio will be right back. Welcome back to Third Phase of the Moon Radio. I'm your host, Dr. J, and we are speaking to none other than Stanton Friedman, godfather of ufology. And just before we went to break, we were talking about China. And I wanted to pose to you this question, Mr. Friedman. Did you see the pictures of that China sent of the moon? Why is it brown versus all the white images that NASA has been feeding us for decades?
I have no idea. Maybe they were telling it like it is instead of preparing it for public consumption. How's that?
Precisely what I was thinking, because that revelation alone, what if it shows that it's not just a dead planet, that maybe that it was had more to it than what we once thought?
Well, you know, again, my view of this whole business is that there are zillions of planets out there, that there's life all over the place out there, and you know, I get really irked at people saying you can't get here from there, and look how much energy to get from another galaxy. I don't care about other galaxies. I mean, look, within 50 light years of here, there are 1,000 stars. 50 light years. That means that within 1,000 light years, it's about 8 million. 8 million within 1,000 light years. And that's still just down the street. The galaxy is about 100,000 light years across. So the notion that, you know, we are the lucky spot and only 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, just a small number. You know, I think it's like how many garages are there on the East Coast. There's a big number. Not everybody has one, you know, but there's a lot of them out there. And our egos, I think, get in the way. And arrogance and ignorance are a terrible combination. You remember people fought the idea, scientists fought the idea that there were rocks coming down from the sky for the obvious reason. Everybody knows there are no rocks in the sky, so how could they be coming down from the sky? Until some came down and people had them analyzed and found out it was different and all the rest of that. But that's one of the functions of my book with Kathleen Marden, Science Was Wrong. We have so many examples, 14 chapters, each one stimulated by an example of some smart person saying something stupid, like man will never fly with anything other than a balloon. That was 2 months before the Wright brothers' first flight. Or space travel is utter bilge. And it's all of these things where smart people were arrogant. They thought they knew all there was to know, and if they didn't know it, it wasn't true. And that stands in the way of progress. It's the people who are willing to look at things in a new way, to say, gee, I don't know what's going on here. Let's check further, folks, instead of dismissing it. I mean, when the British Astronomer Royal, in 2011, I guess it was, said, only kooks see UFOs. What a stupid thing to say. Doesn't have to look far to find out that that isn't true, because there are plenty of astronomers that see UFOs. And some have even reported what they have seen. You know, so it's this whole attitude question of, do we need to look at this subject as a nonsense subject? No. And I can say, having lectured out there in 18 countries and 50 states and 10 provinces, that a lot of people interested, I'll tell you that. look at the migration. I guess you can think of other words for it. To Roswell every year for the festival. Typically, 150,000 people go to Roswell every year. Roswell is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's 200 miles from Albuquerque, 200 miles from Amarillo, 200 miles from El Paso. If you're there, it's because you want to be there to go to the museum. This is what I'm talking about, and the festival. 150,000 every year. So there's an awful lot of interested people going out of their way. And it's not like it's Las Vegas or someplace like that, you know, all kinds of attractions. It's a nice place to visit, I don't mean that. But, you know, it doesn't have the stars, if you will. So people are interested. If more people would get involved, I haven't heard of any recent PhD theses done on UFOs. We're past time. There have been a dozen already, at least. But I think that it's a question of attitude. If we decide we want to really dig into it and we'll find the truth. And now if we can get the media to pay attention to that, that's another story.
Probably one of the biggest problems is trying to get them to pay attention. Now, you mentioned interested parties, which is definitely growing. I want to go back and get a little history lesson about you. When did you start to believe that or know that life exists on other planets? When you were a child, did you think that we were being visited, or did you know, looking in the stars, that something out there was possibly looking back?
Well, neither really. I read a lot of science fiction when I was a kid. Before I was 12, my best friend, his older brother, had a basement full of pulp magazines. I used to take 2 or 3 home when I was over there and read them. So I was excited about that. And you didn't get a good view of the sky. I grew up in Linden, New Jersey, industrial capital of New Jersey, if you will, Standard Oil and all kinds of chemical companies and smog and all that stuff. I'll never forget when I was 16 and up in New Hampshire at a camp on a lake. I couldn't get over it. Where'd all those stars come from? You could see the Milky Way. It really was there, and it was visible. It sure wasn't in New Jersey. So I didn't really get interested at all in flying saucers until I read Edward Ruppelt's book in 1958, and I only bought it because it was a markdown from a discount house. Hardcover book, marked down from $2.95 to $1. The Report on UFOs by Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, who had headed Project Blue Book in the early 50s. And I figured shipping would have cost me $1, so I was getting it for nothing. And I read the book. It intrigued me. It didn't convince me, but I shared it with a neighbor. Charlie was an engineer 10 years older than I was. I was working for GE on nuclear airplanes. Big project, spending $100 million that year. And Charlie was a good engineer, next door neighbor, and he was more impressed than I was. And I was impressed by his being impressed, you know, because I looked up to Charlie. And so I read a bunch more books after I moved to California, some of which were trash. And then my big epiphany came when I found a copy of Project Blue Book, Special Report 14, in like 1961 at the University of California, Berkeley Library. And that got me angry as well as educated me. I mean, data on 3,200 cases, but it included a press release from the Secretary of the Air Force, Donald Quarles. And those words are etched in my brain. On the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. I had the report in front of me, 3,200 cases. But the unknowns were 21.5%. How did the Secretary of the Air Force dare to lie so blatantly? Well, one reason he did, nobody else had copies of the report. But that is part of the cosmic Watergate that I talked about. I mean, I had a security clearance. I'm accustomed to sometimes tiptoeing around the truth a little bit because of security. But to blatantly lie? And especially when the second part, not only were the unknowns not 3%, they were 21.5%, but there was a separate category for those cases for which there was insufficient data, despite what he said, 9.3%. And they did a cross-comparison between unknowns and knowns. The probability that the unknowns are the only ones we're interested in, were just misknowns, was less than 1%. So it was blatant and massive misrepresentation, and I found not one newspaper, and I looked at a lot of them covering that story. This is October 1955. Not one pointed out the facts. And that bugged me. You know, like I say, you can tiptoe around the truth sometimes for security, but blatant lying is something that should not be rewarded by acceptance. It should be trashed. And so that was one of the big events in my life to get me really going on what's the truth here. And, you know, if there's no truth here, why would they so blatantly lie? You normally have to have a reason for lying, don't you? I mean, you can understand when the first atom bomb was tested at Trinity site in New Mexico, the news media, the Air Force, the Army rather, put out a press release. An ammunition dump had blown up, and fortunately nobody was injured because it was seen from 100 miles away. So I can understand that. They lied, but I can understand that in the context of the war we were fighting. But that's different from, and they had a good excuse.
That's sad, how the lie on Project Blue Book. And the thing is, most people won't get past that phrase. They won't look into the details as you did. And I actually got a copy of that from you, in fact, this last year's UFO Congress. Yeah. And in there, the reports are just boggle my mind. This document's there for over 6 decades, and that alone could be looked at and shown so much proof, and yet it's in some ways suppressed. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't know about it.
Well, if you listen to all of the nasty, noisy negativists, as I call them, you wouldn't know about it at all. If there's one thing they're consistent about, it's rule number 1 for debunkers. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. And rule number 2, what the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. And rule number 3, of course, is if you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. And rule number 4, do your research by proclamation. Investigation's too much trouble. Nobody will know the difference anyway. So, Special Report 14 is a good example of that. Debunkers don't talk about it. If they do, they lie about it. And so I don't like people lying. I mean, I thought, foolishly I suppose, when I grew up and wanted to be a scientist and became one, that science is a search for truth. Of course, I thought at one time that journalism was too. I'm a little older now. I know that it's not always true for either group.
The spins, very sadly, the spins. You know, Area 51, a hot topic right now because finally, after decades, it is publicly acknowledged, even though the White House consistently renewed the budget for it. And Obama was recently asked, what do people ask him more than anything else about? And he said Area 51. And I thought, obviously, because he's the only president that can talk about it now. But the fact that everyone is asking shows the interest there. What do you think is happening there, or might have happened at Area 51 that caused it to have this mystique to it?
Well, it's been because of a lot of publicity. What's her name? Jacobson's book is one who said it was founded in 1951. That's where the number comes from, which is nonsense. It was done in 54, and it was set up for the purpose of developing the U-2 aircraft in secrecy. And remember, we used that to fly over the Soviet Union in violation of international law, of course. And they developed lots of stuff out there. Of course, then when satellites came along, the best pictures you can buy are Russian ones, which I think is funny. But Area 51, no question, was set up to do research on advanced systems that you don't want exposed to the public. and that also you want to be safe if somebody drops an atom bomb your way. And it's out in the middle of nowhere. And we know that the U-2 was developed there, and the SR-71 was developed there, and I would say the SR-72, whatever the next model is called, I forget what it is. So the real question, I suppose, is that's where UFO stuff is going on. Well, certainly Roswell stuff wasn't taken to Area 51, didn't exist at the time, 47, and there were other functions for it. It wasn't a big lab complex at the beginning. And we know that the wreckage went to a place that was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, which has, from time to time, 20 to 30,000 people working there. I've been there. I had a contract that involved my going there every month or so. Big place, big facility. I just laughed when somebody called me and said, he and his friends are going to break in at the gate and find all those alien bodies there. I dissuaded him from that. High security, lots of guards, lots of people. I had a security clearance, so when I was there, I did not have free access to every place there. You had to have a need to know. So I had to be escorted to places away from the facility where I was having meetings and stuff. But, and there is a book out by Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, Area 51, the new Area 51, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So it's not the new one, it's the old one. Because that's where wreckage went. That's where a Russian pilot defected, because I think he got $1 million with a MiG, and it went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So who knows all the classified work that's going out there? Not me. And nobody's talking about it. I've been by it. I went by the sign, use of deadly force is authorized. And I think the government has a right to do classified experiments. Not only there, but there's a lot of land in the country you can't fly over, for example. And I had somebody say, oh, come on, Stan, that's ridiculous. It's a free country. Anybody can fly anywhere. There were some pilots there, fortunately. And I said, hey, you guys, are there places you can't fly over? Oh, yes, they're shown on the map. And you want to be escorted and maybe fined, you just try flying over there. So Area 51 is one of a number of highly classified establishments, Dugway Proving Grounds. It's a place where they do chemical warfare work. You can't get in there. That's not surprising. Security, I should say, it's one of my beefs with some of the people who want everything disclosed. We're entitled to know everything. No, we're not. I don't think so. I think there's a very strong national security aspect to the whole UFO story. The first country that is able to duplicate the propulsion system is going to rule the planet, fly circles around anything we got flying. So everybody wants to get that. And certainly the notion that we should put what we know out on the table because the American people should know everything is ridiculous. It really is ridiculous. So I'm not for disclosing everything. It would be nice if there was a worldwide gathering of important people at which they said the planet's being visited, and here are some reasons why we haven't disclosed what we know, and we have conferences scheduled on the religious, economic, philosophical, psychological aspects of what that means that we're being visited. Religion has some serious questions here. Did God make civilizations out there, for example, or just here?
You're absolutely right, and we've got a break in about 5 minutes, so I'm sure this is going to carry over there, but you talked about the Vatican earlier. They seem to be paving the way to disclosure. So yes, there are religious aspects, but at the same time, it looks like all the major institutions may be setting themselves up to say, hey, believe in us, but because it's not inconsistent to believe that God put something else somewhere else. What do you think about that and the big change of the Pope?
Well, I was very glad to hear it. I was shocked the first time I heard it when the previous Pope said something along the lines of, there's no reason God couldn't have made them as well as he made us. my first thought was, who's he been talking to? People forget the Vatican has its own observatory. Father Baldocci attended UFO conferences. I've met him. He's dead now. But so there was definitely an interest there. And you can understand that. One of the big religions, the Muslims, incidentally, do believe that there's other life out there, and they've said so. So, you pay your money and take your choice, but you don't want to be on the outside, do you?
Definitely not. Do you think that crash and retrievals obviously bring the smoking gun? Do you think the Vatican possesses any alien artifacts from possible crash and retrievals?
Don't know. Don't want to speculate on that because I have no idea what they've got. And, it's just like we're still speculating about the miracle of Fatima. There's still supposed to be stuff released. And some people say that was a UFO experience. Way back, what was it, 1918, something like that, where a whole bunch of people saw something strange in the sky. So I'm sure the Vatican has kept tabs on what all goes on there. But it's not only them, not only the Catholics. If you want an interesting book, besides mine, of course, which are listed at my website, www.stantonfriedman.com, but Dr. Barry Downing's book, The Bible and Flying Saucers, is an outstanding work of scholarship. He has a bachelor's in physics and a doctor of divinity. He specializes in divine physics, I guess. But he goes through the Old and New Testaments and finds loads of examples of flying saucer sightings. They didn't call them saucers. Who used saucers back then, But it's an exciting piece of scholarship and could be expanded if we could get more professors to sponsor more students who are digging into strange stuff like this UFO stuff. That would be exciting. So, there's a whole area here that needs a lot more attention. How many courses are being taught on UFOs? There have been some in the past. How many more PhD theses are there going to be? There have been more than a dozen. You never hear about them from the nasty, noisy negativists.
You don't. And as a matter of fact, I think the future will hold much more because you ask any teenager or child right now if they believe in life on other planets. I have not heard a child says no. So I can imagine in a decade or so when they create their own. We're going to come to the break in about a minute, but this is going to carry over after. I wanted to go back to crash and retrievals. Do you know what the most recent cases were and where they were, and was the U.S. in charge of taking them even if they were on international grounds?
Well, the only one that comes to mind is Varginha in Brazil, and I happened to be down there when that went public, and I can't even tell you, it might have been 10 years ago. It's a good case.
And that cut us off. We'll pick that right back up. Everybody stay tuned. Third Phase of the Moon Radio will be right back. And now, we welcome you back to Hour 2 of Third Phase of the Moon Radio. I'm your host, Dr. J, and we are speaking to none other than the godfather of ufology, Stanton Friedman. I want to tell everybody, check out StantonFriedman.com. At www.stantonfriedman.com, there you'll find where he'll be speaking as far as his many great books, Crash at Corona, to Capture, to Science Was Wrong, Top Secret Magic, and there's much, much more available there. And also, if you want to ask questions, call in now. Area code 347-688-2902, or on the West Coast, 818-923-1713, or Skype in at Freedom Screen. And now, Mr. Friedman, right before we went to break, we were talking about crash and retrievals and this recent case in Brazil. I mean, I know it's not yesterday, but a little over a decade ago seems fairly recently. Can you tell us about this case?
Well, it's fairly straightforward. In a small town, that's not really small, but it's not a huge city, Varginha, people saw something strange in the sky, and then it was linked to seeing, how should I put this, strange critters, beings, kind of brown skin, short, not wearing any clothes as I recall, and some firemen picked them up, and the craft was recovered, and supposedly the United States spirited it away. Dr. Roger Lear was there and talked to doctors who said they found that the beings were injured and were somewhat different from us. And there's a book in Portuguese about it, about the Varginha event. And there's even a video that Dr. John Carpenter from the States and myself and Graham Birdsall, the late Graham Birdsall, who had been editor of Britain's UFO magazine, we interviewed several of the investigators to get the story. So what happened, nobody's got the big story other than a number of people were around. Dr. John Mack, the late Dr. John Mack, expert on abduction cases, psychiatrist from Harvard, he actually went down there and talked to the young ladies who were primary witnesses on this thing, and he was satisfied it was an important and significant case and that they weren't telling the truth. And I'm reminded another case, well, you wouldn't call it an abduction, but Zimbabwe, Brazil, again, a number of years ago, Dr. Mack went there too. A bunch of kids out from school. A craft landed, and there were beings there who saw the kids real close. Teacher saw it. Very exciting case. And John investigated that one too, and Cynthia, can't remember her last name, a top investigator in Africa, spent a lot of time down there too. So I mention this because, this isn't a uniquely American or North American or civilized country, big fancy cities kind of phenomena. It goes on all over the world. And I certainly know that from the many countries I've spoken in, that people are interested because they've heard of something happening near them. And, of course, there's always the question of was it a secret government system. And there are people who will tell you that, hey, this was all built by the Germans. Hitler he had his people develop anti-gravity. I just saw that recently in something I read. And my question always about those is, if Hitler had developed a better propulsion system, he would have used it. You can't say he was a nice, kind guy who felt sympathy for his fellow citizens so they didn't want to use these bad weapons. Come on, that's ridiculous, So I don't think Hitler did. When the United States built stealth aircraft, we used them in a war and a whole bunch of other new aircraft. We built the atomic bomb, we used it in a war, 2 of them. I might surprise people to know we've actually tested, we Earthlings, 2,000 nuclear weapons on this planet, which is a scary thought, because there's still plenty of nuclear weapons around. So, it scares me when I think of some of the, what shall I call them, the leading lights of the planet. If they get their hands on a nuclear weapon, would they hesitate to use it? I don't think so.
Bikini Atoll.
A lot of evil people.
Didn't we even take out an entire island when you said 2,000 nuclear tests?
Say that again?
Bikini Atoll, wasn't that one of the islands that we were doing one of the nuclear tests and we destroyed?
Well, that was an early one. That was our first H-bomb. We beat the heck out of the atoll. Not much of it at all, of that at all. It's an interesting progression. From a big bomb in 1944, a blockbuster it was called, gave the energy of 10 tons of dynamite. Wow! Well, the next year, 45, our first atomic bomb released the energy of, about 16,000 tons of TNT. And because we're such smart guys, in 1952, first H-bomb fusion device released the energy of 10 million tons of dynamite. And the Russians let one off a few years later, 57 million tons of dynamite.
It seems
Can you
very
imagine?
plausible exactly why we'd be monitored by an extraterrestrial race right now with what we're doing.
I think they'd want to quarantine us, don't you?
Absolutely. With that kind of lethal power and that we're using against each other, rather than harnessing it for a good reason, first thing we did is went out and created a bomb.
Yeah, yeah. Bigger and better. More bang for the buck. Pretty sad.
It is. It really is. You know, earlier in the last hour we were talking the cost of secrecy when we were talking about possibly rogue nations. I'm going to take this back there if you don't mind. Do you think at some point the cost of keeping this cover-up a secret will be so high that we're going to have to disclose? I mean, again, this is speculation, but the best we can do until we get some more whistleblowers.
I don't know. If 10 different newspapers were in competition to see who could get the most good data out in a hurry, it might put some pressure on some people. It does take money, and newspapers are having a hard time of it, as you know, because of advertising on the internet and stuff like that. But I don't know what's going to force anything, and it may be out of our hands altogether. It may be the aliens land in the middle of a big soccer match, and that would be the end of the cover-up, wouldn't it? With a few million people watching.
Or a billion.
Hey, the Winter Olympics, that would be the time, wouldn't it?
I agree. When a billion people are watching, that's when they should make their grand appearance. Now, you know, Snowden, if you recall on Christmas, he made this remarkable message that says that our generation and the children of the future will never know what it's like to have privacy. Everything from their actions to even their thoughts. I mean, not that they could read thoughts, but because of their monitoring every single thing, their patterns. Some people, that's a very strong statement of where we're going and what our resources are being used for. And some people even think that he's holding on to some UFO footage. And you know also about this secrecy because you filed a Freedom of Information Act request on yourself, right?
I know, because I worked under security for 14 years, but it was a funny experience. I sent off a Freedom of Information Act request to both the FBI and the CIA. I want all your files on me. And I gave them where I was born, when I was born, and, full name, name, rank, serial number, and the whole business. And I mentioned that I'd had a security clearance for 14 years. Well, I heard from the FBI first, and it was very straightforward, very short letter. We don't have a file on you. I knew they did because the security clearance was done by them, but not too long thereafter I heard from the CIA. And they said, all we have on you is a negative name check request from the FBI to see if we had any files on you, basically is what it meant. And they sent me a copy of this little squib of paper, the size of a postcard, really. And so then I wrote the FBI. And I sent him a copy of that. I said, could you please recheck your files? Because this is what I got from the CIA. And I get a letter back from the FBI saying, we have rechecked our files and find that we do have a file on you. However, it's classified. So I send him another letter. I said, I'd like to know the size of the file and the level of security, the classification. That information is classified. Sorry about that. I go through this whole rigmarole, I knew they had a file on me because I had friends who were saying, Stan, why is the FBI asking us questions about you for my security clearance? But what I'm getting at is people who think you can get anything you want, all you got to do is ask for it, don't know what they're talking about. And there's a funny way of dealing with that, too. At the presidential libraries, you can request a mandatory classification review. If you go into a file and you find a sheet, a withdrawal sheet, it'll tell you that this is taking the place of a 5-page memo from John Jones to Tom Smith, top secret, dated October 24th, 1982, whatever. And so you can put in a mandatory classification review request. And say the Eisenhower Library submits it for you to the agency whose document it was, NSA, let's say. And at one time, I don't know what the latest version is, but at one time it was running 2 to 6 years to get a response to those requests. And you know what's funny is I've been talking about the NSA for a long time because we had a lawsuit against them, a Freedom of Information suit. And that's when we found out that they had 156 top secret Umbra UFO documents. Wow, but they wouldn't release any. Then they released some a few years after that. And I used to make jokes about the NSA. You know, everybody says, no such agency, NSA, or never says anything, because most people had never heard of the NSA. Now, thanks to Mr. Snowden, everybody's heard of the NSA. And yes, I would love to know whether he pulled any documents that dealt with UFOs. It's good there was a guy, an Englishman, they were going to pull in. The government was trying to extradite him, the U.S. government.
McKinnon, Gary McKinnon, right?
Yes, that's the man. And the British government said no, finally, for which I'm glad. Now, he was looking for UFO information, but they were going to prosecute to the full extent of the law because he cost them a lot of money by getting into hacking their files, if you will, which is a crock of baloney, you understand, but still. But now Mr. Snowden has given enormous publicity to the long arm and especially ear of the NSA. And it's not surprising, I guess. And the United States isn't the only country that's been doing this stuff. Everybody's been listening in wherever they could on anybody else. But privacy, as you said, is not going to be around very long, is it? Unless you live in a cave, I guess.
Even then, it's possibly scary thought that you may not get it. And as you know, there have been a couple world leaders that have not been happy with the United States spying on them. Do you think the backlash of that might aid us or maybe lose the credibility of the sense that when they say there's no cover-up, people will start to say, yeah, right?
Well, yeah, I think it will help in that regard. That I think people with the internet and, direct access to a few billion people if you want it, I think people resent the notion that the government isn't posting stuff on Facebook about all kinds of classified things. There's a long history of governments covering things up, usually out of self-interest. Look at the experiments that were done with syphilis. And black people were exposed and they were given different drugs to treat it, some of which weren't treatment at all. It's a long, very sad story. And so it's nothing new that governments would hide information that could be of interest to its citizens. But we have a new era on that. And, when I look at the rapidity with which the capability of computers has gone up so rapidly, how many terabytes, I asked somebody the other day how big is the storage on this computer? Oh, several terabytes. Terabytes? Not gigabytes, not megabytes, not kilobytes, but terabytes. Holy cow. And you can see that by the fact that you can download movies. Movies get a lot of information. You couldn't do that 10 years ago.
Quickly, too. You could download them fairly quickly, too, now.
Yeah. Well, the engineers are leading the pack. Moore's Law, one of the founders of one of the big companies, it was established a number of years ago that the number of transistors on a chip was doubling every year or two. This doesn't sound like much until you say, well, wait a minute now, over 10 years, holy cow, that's an enormous improvement. And it hasn't stopped. There were predictions 10 or 15 years ago, oh, it'll level off very soon. Well, it hasn't leveled off, and all our progress on the Internet and all kinds of other areas is dependent on the improvement in electronics. Technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. And when you think of the enormous capability of the NSA and a bunch of other agencies, and where are we going from here? Now, when they start reading your minds, that's when you begin to get a little worried. And it wouldn't surprise me if we learned how to do that as well, which is really scary.
Then they would be putting people aside for, they're putting them away in prisons for their thoughts before they would even take action. Very scary thought. Now, we're talking about Moore's Law and how fast these computers go. Do you think that they will get to the point of creating artificial intelligence?
Well, there is already plenty of artificial intelligence. I mean, you call some places, you don't talk to a person, you talk to a machine. Press 1 if this, press 2 if that, you know. There's a lot of artificial intelligence. If you mean to compete with man, there are some people moving in that direction. And yeah, and that's kind of scary. And I think we're underestimating how complex man really is, but it is scary. And I think there will be artificial intelligence in the sense in which you meant it. And it won't be too long from now. And what we do about that, will it serve us, or will we serve them as opposed to them serving us? And that's a good question. And I don't have an answer. I'm going to be 80 next year. I won't be around when all this stuff happens.
Hopefully you'll be around for the day when we could say, I told you so with regards to UFOs, because it sure seems like it's going down that path. Now, what do you know about military space programs? Because that wasn't not too long ago. I was just doing a random Google search, and you could find all these different logos of actual military space programs, which was a scary thought to know that we've been in space, not under NASA.
Well, you know, for a long time, as a matter of fact, I had a personal involvement with this. The Air Force had a program called MOL, M-O-L, Manned Orbiting Laboratory. It was directly in competition, but for military purposes, with NASA. And as a matter of fact, I'd been laid off at Westinghouse. You know, the program was a success, but the patient died. They canceled the program. Nuclear rocket engines, that was. And I got a job. I thought I had a job. I was offered a job and accepted, trying to figure out how flying saucers work for McDonnell Douglas in astronautics in Santa Monica, California. And the money to fund that, they were able to spend a couple % of this huge budget they had on the MOL program on blue sky stuff, it was called. You know, something with low probability but high return if it worked. And that was my job. I was going to be working on figuring out how flying saucers worked. Wow! Unfortunately, as I was driving across the country, halfway across, to take up my new exciting job, I heard on the radio that the MOL program had been canceled. And I walked into McDonnell Douglas with my offer letter, of course, and they said, you realize we just laid off 5,000 people. And I said, yeah, I realize that, and they kept me on for 3 months. And I did do one thing of real significance, I think. I had a literature search done, scientific report literature, using one key word, magnetoaerodynamics. That's plasmas, ionized air around vehicles in the atmosphere. And I was astonished to find that I got 900 references, of which 90% were classified. This is 1970. Now, somebody was spending a lot of money on such systems. And whether they were trying to duplicate flying saucers or whatever, I don't know. But it wasn't just three guys sitting around the desk. 900 references in a lot of different places. And so, who knows? I'm just reading a book by a guy named Len Kasten about the trip to Serpo. This is supposedly a military program to go to the planet Serpo in the Zeta Reticuli system. And a dozen Earthlings spent a number of years there, and then most of them came back. Some of them, a couple died, and the others decided to stay at Serpo. Now, if you believe the book, and in this title it says a work of fact or not fiction, something like that, then we've already sent on alien craft a bunch of people to live out there and get to know them and all that sort of stuff. Now, at very best, it's in my gray basket. But I'm sure that there was plenty of classified work that went on outside of NASA on advanced propulsion systems, no question about it. So when will we find out? I don't know. They're not telling me.
Now this question is obviously going to lead into the break, which comes in a couple of minutes because it's very convoluted. If you were president, how would you handle all of this? And once disclosure happens, then what? Because obviously it's going to fundamentally change everything. Like I said, I know we're going to get interrupted, but might as well start.
Well, my view is that what you do is to talk to your leading people and say, we need to figure out a way to do this and consider all the implications and lay out a program plan for disclosure. And conferences, international conferences, in which we look at all these different aspects, religious, psychological, philosophical, technological, economic, etc. It is something that needs to be looked at by a very widely background group of people because it changes everything. Once you make that announcement, it has all kinds of implications. But are we going to use it for good, or are we going to fight with each other to see who gets closest to the aliens? We Earthlings aren't very good at working things out amongst us. If we were, why would the planet be spending $1 trillion this year on things military? Not a lot of trust going around, is there, folks?
The opposite, in fact. We're waging money for wars. Like you said, $1 trillion on military, $1 trillion basically on bullets and other ammo and stuff like that. But nonetheless, it's a very scary thought of what is happening with that money and what we could be doing as a society with it if we came together. Now, again, this is also going to cut in the next break, but physical evidence. You mentioned Dr. Lear being in Brazil. He's removed 17 of these implants, and we're going to talk about that right when we get break. I want to ask you what your
Okay.
Welcome back to the final leg of Third Phase Moon Radio. I'm your host, Dr. J, and we are speaking with none other than the godfather of ufology, Stanton Friedman. Be sure and check out his website, www.stantonfriedman.com. Several great books there, everything that he co-wrote with Kathleen Martin, Captured, to Crash at Corona, to Science is Wrong, actually very wrong for that matter. Well, nonetheless, Mr. Friedman, before we went to break, I was asking you what the implication is of Dr. Lear's implants.
Well, isn't it a shame that we don't have money available in the open world to do all the kind of research that is suggested by finding these little things, these implants, and that they emit radio signals and stuff like that, and try to learn from them and trace them back in origin. In other words, could we have built them, stuff like that. I should point out that years ago I found that you could buy implants to put in your cows or your dogs or even in people, small things about the size of BBs that were electronic devices that if you had a transponder, you put it near, it would broadcast information about itself, that is a serial number, name, all that kind of stuff. And that was years ago you could buy that. and so somebody else could certainly do a better job than we have. But it's fascinating that one of the big things is they don't seem to produce inflammation, which basically doesn't make sense. Anything that's embedded in the body should cause inflammation because it doesn't like foreign things in the body. And so that alone would make it worth looking at to find out how they do that. And can we prevent inflammation by using some technique that we can discover by studying this stuff? But certainly Roger has done enough of these to say that something strange is going on in a lot of places. And he we're getting older. We need more young people to come in and get involved in this kind of stuff and using the latest techniques with access to better equipment and all the rest of that. So I think it has serious implications. Where did this stuff come from? And can we establish that it is not ours? Are there techniques being used in manufacture of these things that we don't know anything about? So it's a fascinating area of study, and I have to give Roger credit for spending so much time and effort, and with that goes spending money, to dig into these things. It's one of the many fascinating aspects of this thing. And, it'd be like, I'm sure that there are people who are studying gun camera pictures of UFOs taken by military planes and spectrographs on board aircraft that tell you something about what happens in that ionized air plasma around the craft that we could learn from. But who knows? That's all in the secret world, in the black world. And incidentally, for people who think we can't keep secrets, I saw an article, 5-6 weeks ago maybe, that the total black budget had gone up 3%, and this year would be $50 billion in the United States, and the black budget is not under direct congressional control, like when we developed the atomic bomb, for example. Funny story, President Truman, when he was vice president, did not know about the atomic bomb development program. He wasn't informed until President Roosevelt had died. 13 days later, he was informed. Can secrets be kept? Of course they can. Can these major efforts be done in secret? Yes. As a matter of fact, a plasma physicist told me that, this is from way back when, that the astronomers interested in the stars had made some discoveries that would have helped them on the H program, because a star is basically a big fusion reaction, and that's what a nuclear fusion weapon, an H-bomb, is. But because of security, the two groups didn't know about each other. And so they didn't get the help they might have had. So it's the same with what Roger's doing. Who knows what else is going on elsewhere, and how many other of these implants have been found. Look, if the government knows about those, we know that they have done some work on them, and they're not telling us.
Well, let's hope, for God's sakes, that they actually do collaborate and come forward, because, like you said, this could prove a lot. If it has no reaction as these things are going in or out, imagine what that could do for the science industry. But real quick, Mr. Friedman, we actually have a caller via Skype.
Great.
The name is Dude Guy. Dude Guy, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hello, Dr. Friedman. I'm a great admirer. Long time viewer of a lot of your work on television, and I've just really enjoyed your perspective. But I had a question, I guess a big picture question about understanding of the general society, I guess, it's psychology, about alien life, and when is it going to be, I guess, possible for people to consider it seriously, since, it's in popular entertainment a lot, and you would think that would lead people to ask some serious questions, or make at least discussing it plausible. And then we have UFO sightings, from the Foo Fighters up until very recent day. I mean, it's been a consistent phenomenon for a long time, well documented. So whatever these things are, they seem to have a lot of data points that would spur some, serious debate. And yet, our independent citizens, let's not even leave the government aside, some of our most wealthy, independent, free-thinking people that develop all this great technology, start businesses, have free time to do these things. A lot of them don't seem to question it. I even hear in the private companies that are going to space now, you would think some of these people would say, and if we see any flying saucers, we'll let you know, but they don't discuss it either. So it makes me think that there is some type of insider taboo on the issue.
Well, I think there's no question about it, and it shows you how effective ridicule can be, incidentally. I've checked a lot of audiences. I've given over 700 lectures in 50 states, 10 provinces, and 18 other countries. I get around. At the end of many of my lectures, I ask, I get the first question in the question and answer period, how many people here believe they've seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer? Just raise your hand and I'll point and count. We didn't let the CIA in, I'll say, and stuff like that. So they raise their hand and I point and count. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first hands go up just barely over the heads of the people. They trust me. I mean, I've just given a lecture like Flying Saucers Are Real or some such title. But when I get to the other side of the room, I'm still pointing and counting, the hands go up vigorously. They suddenly realize they're not the only ones. Everybody thought he was the only one. Each person did. Typically, it turns out that 10% of the people believe they've seen one. There's an awful lot of people. But then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down. I also ask, incidentally, if anybody left, how many of you were in the military at the time, and you want to tell us about it? And one guy in front of 1,300 people says, I can't. They told me not to say anything, which was a great line. When people come to my table and they want to buy a book and I autograph it and stuff, they got to tell me their sighting, you see. They know I'm not going to laugh. And they tell me the report, and I ask them a few questions. I say, did you report it? No. Why not? They think I was some kind of a nut. That's the most common response I get. So an attitude has been created that prevents our getting more information that may be changing. An example I've used is the attitude about desegregating schools. The places where it was effective, you desegregate the first grade, next year first and second grade, next year first, second, and third, you get used to it. Time comes in and you haven't asked people to really change drastically. So I think we have a new generation coming up. There's a whole new view of the cosmos here, partly because of Kepler, the satellite which has found so many planets. If we were having this discussion 60 years ago, the general view amongst the intelligentsia was that there aren't any other planets out there. Only our solar system. We're it, and we're at the top of the heap, and that's that. Now, I think everybody says just the reverse. We can't possibly be the only ones, and with all these, apparently about 1 planet per star. So in a galaxy, maybe 100 billion planets, not 8,000 as the SETI people had said. So there's been a change. But change rarely happens overnight in thinking. Now, an event could do it. If in the middle of the Super Bowl a saucer lands and little guys get out and say, take me to your leader, who knows? So I think things are changing, and changing drastically. Now, if they only made my movie Magic Men, then we could get a real test of that. And who knows what's going to happen this year? Huh?
Yeah, that's a very comprehensive analysis there. In the Cold War, in our country, in the Soviet Union, I've heard the rumors that it was kind of created, maybe because of this UFO crisis. and perhaps it has divided governments, all over the world. The secret, if there's a problem or a disagreement about how to deal with it, maybe there's more than one party involved. I mean, the politics or exopolitics could be extremely complicated.
Yes.
And perhaps that's a stumbling block. I mean, do you think
it wouldn't surprise me if it was? How do we go from where everybody says privately that it's real, but publicly, oh no, it's a bunch of nonsense? How do we go from that to where everybody says, well, of course it's real, except for a few percentage? You'll never get everybody to believe anything. There's always a noisy naysayer around, because it can't possibly be that is true. Meteors don't fall from the sky because there aren't any rocks up there. I love that line. So, yeah, it's a very difficult problem. How do we go from where we are? And remember, people in power want to stay in power, and knowledge is power. Nobody wants the citizens of this planet, all citizens of individual governments, mind you, to owe their allegiance to the planet as opposed to that individual government. As far as I can tell, no government wants that. Nationalism is the only game in town. And so you don't want anybody else to break the barrier either, right? So it's a tough one. And you may have noticed the United Nations doesn't seem to have a lot of power. I mean, I gave testimony at the United Nations way back in 1978. Lee Spiegel of Huntington, what is it? Post? Yeah.
Huffington Post?
Huffington Post, yes. He arranged the hearings at the United Nations way back in 78. And he's going strong with Huffington Post. And we had a lot of interesting testimony, but the United States, the kibosh on doing anything about it. And so if there was a world organization, which obviously can't solve problems of peace in Syria, for example, or in the Sudan, or the other trouble spots in the world, what's it going to do about UFOs? What power does it have? We don't have a great council, if you will. Hey, that's a good name. Planetary Council of Leadership for the New World Order to come. But you see what I mean? We don't really have a situation in which it's okay to look at these things because nobody wants to give up power.
Mr. Friedman, out of all the countries you visited, what would you say was the most UFO-friendly?
Oh, boy. Interesting question. Well, at the time, I probably would have said Turkey. I went there for a conference. We had a conference where over 2,000 people attended 3 days in a row. Now, admittedly, there was a little strange aspect. We had a Humvee with armed troops in it escorting our bus from the hotel to the auditorium. That's not an indication that everything is peaceful and good, but there's a friendly response everywhere. Korea had a great response. China Hong Kong was good. Australia, Brazil is certainly one of the most friendly countries when it comes to UFOs. No question about that. Finland, I just got back from there, and I was there years ago to dedicate a UFO exhibit at a science museum. Would you believe? And there was a Russian cosmonaut there, too, for the same purpose. We couldn't really talk to each other because we don't speak each other's language. In Finnish, nobody speaks. Finnish and Hungarian and Estonia. Three countries whose language is a mystery to the whole rest of the world. But they're interested in UFOs.
You got any questions for Mr. Friedman?
Oh, probably an infinite amount, but I think, my overall feeling is that technology and keeping it classified is one of the big reasons why they don't want to discuss our own technology or the alien technology or their presence until, some date when they feel they have a greater handle on things and how it will be distributed and used by the planet. Because, we could talk about free energy or different things that exist. I mean, I happen to know there are, even more basic energy solutions, not even getting into Tesla or alien power plants, things like thorium reactors and things that aren't being used, and you have to wonder why. And it just concerns me.
Money.
that enough of our best citizens aren't able to pose the questions and bring things to be examined by the public, and not even, our military, and, people who speak out. Somebody like Smedley Butler, who wrote War is a Racket. I mean, we need somebody like that now to write about, the UFO cover-up, I think.
Well, yeah, we do, and we do need somebody in the media to be a champion of this. And I'll tell you, I was very disappointed at the Peter Jennings mockumentary of 2005. They interviewed 150 people. They used 50. And the conspiracy plot, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, is that somebody in the government wanted to know, what do these UFO people know? Should we worry about it? Well, how are we going to get them to talk to us? Well, you have a program taking one of the big three network newsmen, anchormen, and they'll all want to be on that, which is true. So they did that. And can you imagine that John Mack wound up on the cutting room floor? Dick Haynes? There were a number of people, outstanding researchers, who wound up on the cutting room floor. And somebody has over 150 hours of testimony about what's really going on. And I'll tell you, let me give you the strange reason I was disappointed. Peter Jennings and I were both born on July 29th. And we're both Canadian Americans, or American Canadians, however you want to put it. So I thought I'd get at least decent treatment on the program. Well, I used 20 seconds of an hour-long interview and called me a promoter twice in a period of time. I forgot that Matteo Mussolini was also born on July 29th.
Peter,
it's a serious problem.
That Jennings documentary didn't help us very much. Now, I know we got a few minutes left for the show. Before we do, I want to plug in your website one more time, stanfriedman.com. Also, check out thirdphaseofthemoon.net. And if anybody's captured anything amazing, be sure and send it to the Cousins Brothers via Skype or Facebook at Third Phase of the Moon. Now, Mr. Friedman, two questions I'm going to lead into. I guess they could be as final ones. One, what's the most shocking case you worked on aside from Roswell? And the second one is, what can you tell each listener and viewer of Third Phase of the Moon out there of what they can do to take disclosure into their own hands?
Well, the most shocking case, that's a tough one. Well, it's the other one, the Hill case, when you stop to think about it, that aliens can come here and casually abduct Earthlings and test them and catch and release program, toss them back. That they could do that and get away with it, and the government doesn't care about these people being kidnapped, doesn't want to see justice done, etc. And that's shocking. That case is described in detail and captured, of course, by Kathleen Martin, Betty's niece, and myself. What was the second question?
What would you tell all the listeners of the show and the viewers of Third Phase of the Moon what they can do to help aid in disclosure?
Well, I think the primary thing is to get educated. Find out, talk to your local MUFON representative. Find out what's happening in your area. MUFON gets 600 reports a month, for God's sakes, and most people don't know it. The public doesn't know it. Become educated. Read the books you can find, not just mine. There are a number of good books out there. And speak out when the time comes. Don't laugh when your neighbor tells you about having seen a flying saucer. and maybe try to organize an attempt to find out from military guys who are long since out of the service what they know. Many people will talk as they get closer to their grave, so to speak, if they feel it's safe, that they have nothing to lose. And we need much more effort to get this information together. Don't just sit and say, oh, it's a bunch of baloney. Oh, I believe, but I'm not going to do anything about it. There's a lot of serious stuff out there which you should become acquainted with. There's a 10-page bibliography in my book, Top Secret Magic. 10 pages. Includes, I think it's 11 PhD theses. So there is information to become aware of. Sponsor one if you're a professor. Don't say, I don't dare do that. I'd lose tenure. Have the guts to sponsor. So education, I guess, is what it boils down to.
Education and realization, and the ridicule factor's got to stop. That's one thing I think is definitely key. Well, Mr. Friedman, I do want to say we absolutely had a pleasure to have you. Mr. Dude Guy, got a quick question for Mr. Friedman before we get off?
You working on your next book yet?
I'm thinking about it.
You can always use another one.
We'll try. Yeah, I agree. I'm getting antsy. I want to be working on the project like a book. Keeps me busy.
What's the next step for you? What are you speaking at? Which actually just brought us to our end.
And I'll be in Roswell, and I'll be at the MUFON conference just outside Philadelphia. Both of those are in July. There'll be more coming up.
And all of that is on StantonFriedman.com, everybody. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Third base of moon.